One thing that's really been on my mind lately has to do with Michael Afton, and the possibility that if he didn't stick around for the Pizza Sim fire, what was he up to after this? So today, we need to talk about Michael and what he would be doing if he's alive by the time of the Pizzaplex, and why he wouldn't have stuck around for the fire anyway. In order to do this, we're also going to need to talk about Helpy and their significance to Michael's story, touching on some of what Michael may have been doing after Pizza Sim.
This is gonna be so much fun!
But it is going to get messy, so strap in. First things first, I really need you to journey back with me to Sister Location, towards the very end of the game when Circus Baby tells Michael that
there is something bad inside of me. I'm broken. I can't be fixed. I'm going to be taken to the scooping room soon, but it's not going to fix what's wrong with me. What is bad is always left behind. Will you help me? I want you to save what is good, so the rest can be destroyed and never recovered.
That line there is incredibly important, but let's keep listening.
There is a button on my cheek. You must find it and press it. There is a passcode that you must enter before you can retrieve me. Enter the code carefully. Good. A hatch should have opened. Take the card that you find inside.
I have to interrupt again here because we find this card again in Help 1 and 2. This card that Circus Baby just mentioned. We could argue that this card just looks like Circus Baby's, but in my mind, this is no coincidence. Alright, let's keep listening.
Now you must turn back. I will guide you through Funtime Auditorium so you can reach the scooping room. When you are there, I want you to destroy this body. Put the card into your handheld device, and I can continue to speak to you.
Why am I having us listen to all of this? Well, let's talk about what's actually happening here. Let me preface this by reminding you that it's in this same night that Circus Baby drops some other important info on Michael first, saying,
I'm pretending. Remember how I said I could pretend?
To kind of put this all together, Circus Baby told us earlier in the game that she learned how to pretend. I believe this speech we just listened to about the bad being inside Circus Baby is all part of her pretending here. She clearly states on night 3 that
there's something very important that I've learned how to do over time. Do you know what that is? How to pretend. Do you ever play make-believe? Pretend to be one way when you are really the other. It's very important. But Laura never learns. But I do. They think there is something wrong on the inside.
So to further explain what I think is happening here is that Baby actually lies to Michael. When she says,
they think there is something wrong on the inside.
She's intentionally leading Michael to believe that the bad part of Circus Baby is actually on the outside. She wants Michael to destroy her body but keep the card that was inside of it. So then Michael believes that he's saving what is good. But the card that Michael takes from Baby is absolutely not what is good, but is arguably actually part of what's wrong with Baby. And I would further argue that she knows it. So to try and clear up any confusion, how I currently see it is that Circus Baby, the program that's in this card chip thing, I'm just going to call it a card chip going forward because Circus Baby calls it a card. A lot of people call it a chip, so I feel like card chip is just kind of the best of both worlds here. But anyway, so the card chip and Elizabeth I see as separate characters. Elizabeth is killed by the animatronic and possesses it, but this card chip in my mind can't be Elizabeth because we know that Elizabeth leaves with Ennard. Specifically, I bring this up because Scott gave us some interesting dialogue within some source code on FNAF World's website back in the day and Scott Games' website. Essentially a back and forth between the souls and Elizabeth. Let me read that real quick. So it goes back and forth. So first the souls are like, you are crowding us. And then Elizabeth is like, be quiet. You can't tell us what to do anymore. Yes, I can. You will do everything that I tell you to do. We outnumber you. That doesn't matter, dummy. We found a way to eject you. You would be lost without me. Haha, say goodbye to our friend. And that line there, I think, is pretty explicitly Funtime Freddy, or whoever was possessing Funtime Freddy. So in my mind, that discussion ends with Elizabeth being ejected, and that's like where Scrap Baby comes from in Pizza Sim. But as for the Circus Baby program, it clearly leaves with Michael in his handheld device. This is why Circus Baby says,
there is a passcode that you must enter before you can retrieve me.
You can retrieve me. So we're retrieving the actual Circus Baby program here. Now I want to summarize where we are so far in case anyone's a little confused, because I know this is a little messy. So when Michael goes down to the sister location bunker, he's tricked by Circus Baby. It makes sense that Elizabeth and the other souls are also tricking him in a sense because everyone has a similar goal here, to leave the bunker. But while Ennard takes Michael's physical body to escape, the Circus Baby program stays with Michael in his handheld device. Michael believes that he has his sister with him in this card, because he's taken what is good. And it's at this point where I really want to discuss Michael's character motive. How you see Michael as a character completely changes how you view what happens next. I've gone into some of what I think Michael's driving motivation is in a previous video, so if you're interested, be sure to check it out. In a nutshell, I think Michael wants his siblings back. Ever since he lost his brother and sister, I think Michael regrets his past and wants to bring his siblings back to him. William somehow seems to have convinced Michael this was possible, or I can't imagine that he'd have come down here to the bunker willingly. This is also something that Circus Baby mentions to him. She's genuinely flabbergasted that he would willingly come down here by choice. Anyway, how I see events is that Michael is not happy with his father after sister location. So for me, when Michael says,
"I'm going to come find you,"
and we're then shown the FNAF 3 location where William is, burnt to the ground, I can't help but tie Michael to that fire. And if that's the case, it doesn't surprise me that he'd again be connected to a fire to end his father's legacy once and for all. So where that leaves us, Michael takes this card chip from Circus Baby, thinking that this is the part of Baby that's good. Essentially, he thinks this card chip holds his actual sister, and that Ennard is part of what's bad, which means that him being scooped by Ennard is only going to solidify and reinforce the idea that everything else about Circus Baby really is what's bad, Ennard and his actual sister included. I really think that Michael's speech at the end of the game takes on a different context if he's had a change of heart seeing what became of his sister. Either way, if you're able to come to the conclusion that after his experience in sister location, Michael is no longer on Team William, then I want you to listen to this message to his dad in a new light. When he tells William that he did what was asked of him, is there a possibility that he's actually keeping some information from William? See, if Michael has taken what he believes to be the good part of Circus Baby, he can still tell William that he did what William wanted him to, without having to mention this card at all. The point is that it'd be important for Michael to preserve Circus Baby's card chip thing, and if he doesn't trust William at this point, he's not going to mention that card chip at all. And I think the reason for this is that Michael wants to put his sister back together. I genuinely think that's why he came down here in the first place. So all throughout Pizza Sim's story, as Michael interacts with Scrap Baby, he's unaware that it's actually his sister in there. He thinks this is the bad part of Circus Baby. He's purging the bad part of Circus Baby when Henry starts the fire in FNAF 6. That's why Michael's on board with the whole idea. In other words, in Michael's mind, all the bad from Fazbear is being destroyed in this final fire in Pizza Sim. And Michael doesn't have a reason to stick around if he wants to rebuild his family. I think this is why we not only find Helpy again in Help 1 and 2 with a card chip in his head that just so happens to look like Circus Baby's card chip, but we also find in the same room a picture of Helpy escaping a burning building. There's also a picture of Scrap Baby here, which I think is showing us something intentionally. I don't think any of this is a coincidence. For me, it's clearly showing us that Helpy escaped the fire, while simultaneously creating a distinction between Elizabeth and Helpy. The real Elizabeth is in Scrap Baby, and Helpy is its own thing. So when we saw open Helpy's head, this is literally supposed to show us that this is Circus Baby's card that Michael took. This is where Michael has stored this card chip ever since the end of Sister Location. It's why Helpy is such a big deal in Pizza Sim and onward. He's been chilling with Michael all this time. In Pizza Sim, Helpy is kind of just a little goofball, helping out here and there. I think it's important to take note of this specific character and its appearances throughout the games, however. See, if this is supposed to be Elizabeth as far as Michael knows, why did we end up with a Helpy mascot? Well, let's think about Helpy for a minute. Where else do we see Helpy in Five Nights at Freddy's? This is where it gets really interesting. Helpy most looks like Funtime Freddy, and who does Funtime Freddy most resemble? Well, it goes back all the way to Secret of the Mimic, where we have a helper machine. We also have Mr. and Mrs. Helpful that I think look a decent bit like Helpy. But then I want to point out how Helpy also appears in Help 1 and 2, and what I would argue is an appearance as the Mimic. I made a whole video on this idea, but in a nutshell, we're offered presents in Help 1 and 2, and are obnoxiously hounded by Helpy to open them up. When we do so, however, we're met with a bad ending and die. It's a reverse of how Secret of the Mimic plays out, where collecting all the presents, Arnold's able to fix what is broken. The Mimic, having seen Arnold collecting presents in Secret of the Mimic then, now uses that same present gifting strategy to trick us into receiving gifts, but meeting our demise instead. In that previous video, I go into much greater detail on the Secret of the Mimic similarities and how that all connects to F10 and Help 1 and 2. But for our purposes today, this isn't the only time we have a Helpy acting sinister like this, because the Mimic pulls another similar stunt in ruin, using this corrupted Helpy character, lying to Cassie multiple times to ultimately free the Mimic from its confinement. The Mimic tricks people over and over and over, the implication being that Michael was tricked as well. The Circus Baby card chip, then, is either the Mimic program from Secret of the Mimic, or William's closest attempt at replicating it. It really depends on where the story goes after Secret of the Mimic, but narratively right now, I'm just going to use the idea that this is, in fact, the Mimic program. It works either way for the most part. There are just some differences that would have to be more fleshed out. For example, if this is the actual Mimic program, why does Circus Baby have to learn to pretend? If she's the actual Mimic program Edwin made, I would think it would already know how to do that by default. But that could just be part of her manipulation tactic, I don't know. I'm not going to try and answer all of the theoretical what-ifs because we really need another game to be able to piece some of that together without just making up headcanons. I'm good at that. Let's continue though. All that to say, my conclusion is just that Helpy-like characters have been connected to the Mimic multiple times now in Five Nights at Freddy's, so I don't have a problem connecting the Mimic to the Helpy that Michael has with him either. But I want to switch gears now, because by the time of Security Breach, we find a room just like Michael's from Sister Location. Coincidence? I think not. Maybe more importantly though, it's what's outside the room that really intrigues me. See, we have the Circus Baby card now. We have Helpy. We have Michael. What's the plausible outcome if all three are still around? Well, Michael's going to have been trying to put Elizabeth back together. And that's the other idea I really want to touch on today. Now, if Michael Afton's room was all that we found in Security Breach, this wouldn't be that big of a deal to me. But we also find a room full of sticky notes, staffbot heads all over, and maybe most importantly, a staffbot recreation of the Afton family. Now, if Michael kept this Circus Baby card chip, he's going to need to use it to bring his sister back, right? I can't help but wonder if Michael's been trying to perfect finding a vessel for his sister. And part of why I think this may be the case is that near Michael's room, we find various staff bots that appear to have been experimented on and used in various somewhat unique ways, as if they're test subjects of some sort. Since Michael knows at least a little of what his dad was meddling with as far as supernatural things go, there's no telling what sort of experiments Michael may have tried to bring Elizabeth back. Before I continue with this train of thought though, I do want to make a very important note here. Helpy does not seem aggressive in Pizza Sim. Not until Help Wanted 2 and Ruin does Helpy seem to become aggressive. And that takes place after Security Breach. So was there a change in the Mimic's motive? Or was the Mimic playing along until it got Michael to do something it wanted? Was Circus Baby actually malicious? Or was it just confused? Was the goal just to escape? Motive matters. If this card is the Mimic program, what does it want? Because there's something very crucial I haven't brought up yet. The sticky note room isn't significant just because of the Afton staff bot arrangement. Something else is going on here. As I see it, these sticky notes were left by a Mimic Endo, specifically a young Mimic Endo. It's clearly learning to write, and it's even left some binary code, just like we see the Mimic program doing in Secret of the Mimic when it leaves emails for Edwin. But we're starting to run into some problems, aren't we? This clearly has to be a Mimic program writing these very notes, but how is that possible if the Mimic is already angry and under the Pizzaplex? I've got to drag you back to Secret of the Mimic to try and answer this. We're shown in the secret ending that the Mimic can be fixed. The Endo can be fixed. It becomes David, grabs his tiger, goes to the bed to sleep, and powers off. We don't know what happens after this. Does the Mimic wake up after this? Is it at peace? I can't answer all of this yet until we get another game release, but there are ways that each of these endings can still work. The Mimic would just have to be contained by someone else down the line in the bad endings, or Fazbear could end up with the Mimic Endo and the schematics if the Endo isn't active and Arnold deactivated it. In which case William ends up with the program, but similar to Edwin, isn't able to figure out why it worked the first time. This could even tie into some of William's motivation for the MCI and telling his son that he will put him back together. Regardless of what happens to the Mimic at the end of Secret of the Mimic, there has to be at least one child Mimic Endo by the time of Security Breach, if these sticky notes were written by a Mimic Endo, which I think has to be the case, as these notes do seem to tie back specifically to some of the Mimic Endo's memories from Secret of the Mimic. It even writes things like fun, 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 which for me is directly tied to Jackie, but it is a pretty generic phrase, so maybe I should point at a more significant sticky note that says, "This is my home," and another note that says, "Leave." That's important because in Secret of the Mimic program losing its home seems to be devastating to it. We can literally find an email in Secret of the Mimic from the Mimic to Edwin asking, "Edwin, are we losing our home?" And the binary code at the top of the message translates to the word sad, so clearly losing your home is a big deal to the Mimic. But to kind of bring us back to Michael, how I see it, Michael had to have found this endo one way or another. Whether Helpy led him to it, maybe Michael stumbles across F10, there's a lot of ways the story could be going. Regardless though, Michael reunites the endo with the Mimic program, and the Mimic endo is back in its child form. I mean, heck, it could even be connected to the Faz wrench or something. Maybe Michael finds it and boots up the Mimic that way, I don't know. Regardless, imagine Michael's confusion when the endo already has memories that aren't lining up with Elizabeth's. I believe this is why Michael would have set up the Staffbot Afton family, to help the Mimic remember Elizabeth's past, similarly to what we see in Help Wanted 2, where we can train the endos to become whatever superstar we want them to be. Because remember, Michael thinks he has the actual Elizabeth, so this must be immensely confusing for both the Mimic endo and for Michael. Regardless of whether David is here still or not, I think there's a good chance the endo would still have memories attached to it. The Mimic would be confused by these conflicting memories, hence the binary code message it wrote down on one of the sticky notes that when translated reads as, "Why is I?" This endo is trying to figure out what it actually is. Hilarious enough, Michael and the Mimic seem to be getting along fine. The Mimic endo feels safe and home once more. If Burry's Manor is under the Pizzaplex in some sense, this would be even more impactful for the Mimic to feel at home. As for this lovely security guard drawn here then, I think this is a drawing of Michael. It's someone the Mimic has learned to trust, but we know that the Mimic doesn't stay friendly. Something had to have angered it, and that's kind of where I want to leave this video at, because there's a lot more going on at this point. You have Vanny, you have Sun and Moon, you have the Glamrocks, and for me, something had to have happened to Michael, because I don't think he'd abandon this endo just like that. But we know the endo ends up without Michael because Pizzaplex employees discuss a creepy bot that was trained to do busy work under the daycare. I'll continue where I think the story might be going in another video, but at this point I don't have quite as many solid connections to make without presenting a decent amount of just what ifs. So that video will be coming soon, but it's going to be under the Lo-Fi and Theorize section of my channel soon. Again, I could be completely wrong with all of this, but Steelwool and Scott are really going to have to do some solid work to convince me that Michael isn't a factor in the modern FNAF timeline. But what do you think? Do you think I'm going off the deep end here? Because this is only the half of it. The next part is going to be even more wild. So anyway, if you stuck around, thank you for watching. Feel free to sub. Really appreciate it. And that's all I've got to say. I will talk to you later.